Give me 1 second. I got an attorney. But I got send it to me. Sure. I already know what's going to do.
Page, but you should be able to get on without any issues. If not, please flag us down and we'll find somebody to help you if we can't help you ourselves. I'm Emma Broughton. I'm the Director of Digital Learning, and I'm excited to see you here to have this conversation with us about our Real Issues and Real Data series. I'll turn it over to our Executive Director to introduce herself.
Hi everyone, I'm Krista Lazuski, and I'm the Executive Director here at the Friday Institute. And first and foremost, I want to welcome you, and I want to welcome you for coming to participate in the conversation today. As Emma mentioned, this is part of our Real Issues, Real Data series, and throughout this next academic year, what we're doing is we're asking questions kind of at the intersection of research, policy, and practice. Before we get started today, I want to introduce just a few folks that we have invited, and it's our honor to welcome here today. Catherine Truitt, our State Superintendent of Instruction, is just a wonderful supporter. Yeah, give her a round of applause. One of my newly minted heroes, now that I'm myself also new here in the state of North Carolina. Jill Kamnitz, who is on the State Board of Education. Yep, applause. And Senator Jay Chaudhry, who is here as well. And we are in Senator Chaudhry's district, and Senator Jim Birkin. So I want to welcome all of you as well. Now, just a little bit about the Friday Institute. Are there any of you here who are at the Friday Institute for the first time? Welcome, we welcome you here. And if you've been here before, we welcome you back. We were an idea of a place before we were ever a building, but the building itself is pretty nice. So we're both an idea and a building. And we work at the intersection of research, policy, and practice. So this Real Issues, Real Data series that we're running really is at the intersection of what we do. We work to foster collaboration and conversation to improve education across the state of North Carolina. We work locally across the state, but we also make global impacts as well. So some of our work, it reaches places as far away as China, but our work is nationally known. And it's very common that I will be in a meeting or I'll be at a national meeting and people will say, the Friday Institute, I have a story about the Friday Institute. So I've been the executive director for a year. I'm new to North Carolina, I'm new to Raleigh, and I'm new to the Friday Institute. But I like to say this is my dream job and the dream place for me to land, because I get to do what excites me the most, make impacts and ask questions about how those impacts could be scaled and what conditions it might take to make something exciting happen in education. I've already said this. Now I'm going to hand it off to Emma, and she's going to explain a little bit more about our Real Issues, Real Data series.
Thanks, Krista. So you are part of our series right now, and we're thrilled to have you in this conversation because it's the ripped from the headlines kinds of topics that we want to address in this series, and take that research, policy, and practice that Krista mentioned and see how they can be interwoven and impact each other. They're not exclusive of each other. They're really meaning interconnectedness here that can allow us to better understand those different layers and how they affect us. And so our Deputy Director and Professor of Consular Education, Jose Picart, talks about what do we mean when we're empowering teachers and students. It's really thinking about how do we use that research so that folks can do their work more successfully and have that impact on students. Or our Director of Strategic Initiatives and Research here, Callie Edwards, talks about how do we learn from our education partners. That's across that vertical band there, from the classroom and students and parents all the way up to the state leaders as well. Learning from them to understand what are the problems that educators are facing And how do we apply research and policy in order to think differently about what can impact what's happening in those spaces? And so when we designed this real issues, real data type of series, it was for us to have those conversations, to talk with the researchers and experts, to include educators and policy leaders, to think about how this interconnectedness of thinking can make a difference for our students and have an impact on their learning. So I'm excited then to have you join us today for this specific topic. And we have our Associate Dean of Research and Innovation who's joining us, Dr. Karen Hollebrands, who will be with us today for part of this conversation as well. Thank you.
Good morning and thank you. And thank you for inviting me to join you all for today's event. I'm the Associate Dean for Research and Innovation in the College of Education. I work with faculty and staff to engage in research across disciplines and fields to fulfill our college's land-grant mission, to advance knowledge and to solve some of the most pressing challenges in North Carolina around education. So as globally recognized experts, our faculty and staff are transforming the practice of teaching, learning, and leading. With over $124 million in funding for 187 active research projects, our College of Education is ranked in the top 5% of all colleges of education across the nation. So that's quite outstanding. Within our college, we have 3 academic departments. We have the Educational Leadership Policy and Human Development Department. We also have Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics Education, and Teacher Education in the Learning Sciences Department. We also have a Belk Center for Community College Leadership and Research, which supports community colleges across North Carolina and beyond through executive leadership programs, research, and the Doctor of Education program. And last but not least, we have our Friday Institute. The Friday Institute, as you've heard, is a special place that develops, refines, and scales innovative solutions to the pressing problems of educators and students in North Carolina and beyond. It serves as a bridge between educational research at the university and the practice of K-12 educators in the field through translational research, turning theoretical insights into practical, actionable strategies for educators. These insights are also shared and used to inform policy decisions in education. And I want to mention, I was at a conference in Australia and I was meeting with some researchers and they mentioned even, across the globe, their admiration for the Friday Institute and their appreciation for the courses that we offer through the place. So if you haven't had a chance to check those out, I would encourage you to do so. So I'm so proud of the work of our Friday Institute and look forward to today's discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Next, it's my honor to introduce Superintendent of Instruction, Catherine Truitt. We welcome you to the podium for some opening remarks as well.
Well, thank you so much, Krista, and good morning to you all. Thank you for coming here today to gather in this space and talk about an issue whose time has come for a solution. This, to me, as a lifelong educator and a former high school teacher, is something that is wrapped up in the totality of the pace of change that we're experiencing as a nation and as a world due to technology. And I would argue that we haven't really solved a lot of the challenges that K-12 leaders experience and teachers as well due to that pace of change. So this is a topic that needs a thoughtful solution. If I could put my teacher hat on for a minute, my last 3 years in the classroom were spent in Johnston County when I was a teacher there. And that was 2009 to 2012. And that was a very interesting time as it relates to technology. We already had Google, of course, but something happened during those 3 years. I saw students go from having flip phones to having smartphones. And when students had flip phones, there were some flip phones, if you can remember, that had the ability to send pictures and, obviously you could text and call and so on and so forth. But what I remember when the kids started getting smartphones and of course having them at school because we had no cell phone policies was the amount of time that I felt like I was wasting policing cell phones. If you were to ask a teacher, do you think kids should have cell phones in class, they're going to say no. Because of the amount of instructional time that gets wasted on this issue. And then what happened was Twitter blew up. And then we had students tweeting about each other, tweeting about their teachers, tweeting about things that were inappropriate, and again, no Twitter policy. And so it was definitely almost like we flipped the switch and things changed overnight for teachers, especially for our high school teachers. And you know, this was during a time when we still had laptop carts, so there weren't very many one-to-one initiatives, and so the idea that you as teachers would infuse technology in education was you know, we were able to infuse it maybe one day a week if you could get the laptop carts, but mainly we were using the laptop carts for the junior research paper. Some of us had smart boards, some of us didn't. So that the idea that technology would be a part of a student's everyday learning was not really a thing yet. And I'll tell you, that was also around the time, for me anyway, that the debate kind of reared its head about open notes testing. So should we allow students to have their notes? What does it mean? How many of you have ever heard Bill Daggett speak? Okay, a lot of you. So Bill Daggett is a K-12 ed reformer, former assistant commissioner in New York, and he has been speaking about the ways that education needs to kind of skate in front of the puck for the last 20 years. And I remember him in 2010 talking about how someday kids were going to have glasses that would show them Google, or that they would have wearable, a watch that would show them Google. So what does that mean for testing in the classroom? And I ended up being a turnaround coach for Bill Daggett after those 3 years of teaching ended. And during that time, I remember being with him in a classroom where the math team in a high school was debating whether or not to allow the students to take a sheet of formulas into the test. And there were some teachers who felt like, why shouldn't we let them take the formulas into the test? We're not testing to see if they were memorized, we're testing to see if they can apply the formulas. Well, then of course you had the other teachers who were like, over my dead body, will these kids take the formula, take a piece of paper with the formulas written into the test? And so Bill tried to help them understand that, while we used to say, well, in the real world, they're not going to have access to the formulas, so they have to memorize them. Well, of course, we know that that's not true today. And in fact, a student could just speak it into ChatGPT and get the answer. So what in the world are we doing? I mean, we have not solved the problem for how to deliver meaningful daily instruction in an age of Google, let alone in an age of ChatGPT. And so that is one of the reasons why this issue with cell phones is something where the solution is incredibly important, and it's important to get this right. I want to put my parent hat on for a minute too, because I am the parent of 3 children, one of whom has graduated from college, one is in college, and one is still in high school. And in 2009 through 12, when I was teaching in Johnston County, they were either in elementary school or in diapers. And so I didn't ever think about this from the parent's point of view. My students would say, I would say, can you put your phone away? And they would say, but I'm texting my mom, which, maybe that was true, maybe it wasn't. But I had zero sympathy for the fact that this child was trying to communicate with a parent. I just didn't. But of course, now I text my kids all the time. when they're at school. And the reason why is because their schedule and my husband's schedule are changing all the time. My son doesn't drive yet. We're constantly coordinating with grandma, with mom and dad to figure out, was practice canceled? Are you going to practice after school? I forgot my lunch. All of those kinds of things are why 66% of parents, when surveyed, say that they don't want cell phone bans. And so this is an issue that is going to have to be worked on alongside parents. Now, I will tell you that if you've read anything about this issue, what you know is that once a clear cell phone policy is in place, everything works out. And we do have states that are doing this. We've got the OECD actually has some new data on what's happening in other countries and how it's leading to better student academic outcomes when these limitations are placed. And what superintendents will tell you also is that just because you're able to control cell phone issues during the school day doesn't mean that they will continue to be controlled at home. And a lot of the shenanigans that occur that cause superintendents to have to make 1 a.m. phone calls are occurring while students are at home on their cell phones. So this is a highly nuanced conversation. I'm thrilled that you're referring to this opportunity as a policy opportunity rather than a ban. When we ban things, we create groups. We create groups who are in favor and those who oppose. And then we often attach some sort of morality to that. We don't want to do that in this instant. This is why bans are so problematic. This needs to not be about banning cell phones. It needs to be about creating policies that are right for students and their families and teachers so that our students can thrive. So thank you all. I'm going to stay as long as I can today. I'm really excited to hear what Krista and the team have in store, and I know you all are going to have great conversations. Thank you so much.
That you mentioned, because I think it's relevant to something you said earlier in your remarks, Superintendent Truitt. When I was also coming of age in my academic career during the time period that you mentioned, 2008, 2009, 2010, I'm an early adopter of Twitter. My username is Cake Lays. That's how early I was to the scene, although I'm not very active on Twitter. But I preserved that username because it feels like an achievement to me. But it was also during that time frame that we started to see in our feeds on Facebook and Twitter, instead of it being a chronological feed, it's an algorithmic feed. So that people are rewarded, and what gets boosted in feeds is not a chronology, it's based on likes, it's also based on engagement. And engagement can sometimes be another word for disagreement, so that someone could post something very provocative. And then the engagement goes up because people are reacting and they're responding and they're retweeting. And this engagement algorithm is what drives traffic, it's what drives what we see, and it can be kind of limiting. And so one question that is a fair question to ask in this context is, to what extent we are going to want children and youth to have access to that kind of information, but to also be creating that kind of information that gets driven in a way that sometimes we don't even understand, the why and the how. And so that's part of the nuance, part of the conversation that we're having today. Now, to that end, I also want to introduce a couple other folks to come up to the podium and offer remarks. Senator Bergen and Senator Chaudhary, we also invite you up as well. You're it.
This working? Okay. I'm going to be very brief because I know we're anxious to cover the materials. But first, I just want to thank Krista and Emma from the Friday Institute for your leadership in organizing this conference, and certainly thank each and every one of you for the work that you do in educating our kids. And certainly want to thank Senator Jim Bergen, who is a great friend and been a great partner, highly respected in the Senate for someone who works across the aisle. And I think what excites me about this issue is this is not a red or blue issue. This is an issue to look out for what's best for our children. And I will say, before Senator Bergen speaks, that if anybody comes and visits us to the Senate gallery and we're debating, there is probably not a better active listener than Senator Bergen. He listens to every speech intently, while a number of us, including myself, may be on our cell phone. So certainly don't model great behavior. Certainly Senator Bergen does. I think as Superintendent Truitt mentioned, as a former lawyer, as someone who served as a lawyer in the Attorney General's office, I've dealt with the intersection of children and technology when social networking sites like Facebook and MySpace came out, and there was great concern about adults preying on children on these social networking sites. But I'm really here less as a policymaker, more as a parent, and I'm here as a parent because I felt like one of the biggest decisions we made as a family was deciding whether we were going to provide our eldest child with a cell phone. And I'm just going to recount the story because it may be one that each and every one of you as a parent may have encountered as well. But our oldest daughter, Leah, had requested a cell phone. She did so, I think, around the end of 6th grade because many of her friends had also asked for a cell phone. And so Leah, and I guess in a really own fashion, decided to make a PowerPoint presentation about the pros and cons of getting a cell phone, which I think is also acknowledgement of the use of technology that kids can use effectively. Afterward, my wife, Sejal, and I convened, and much to her disappointment, we opted not to provide a cell phone until the middle of 7th grade. Now, more recently, we were confronted with a similar decision with our youngest son, who is now an 8th grader at Martin Middle School. And I will say, unfortunately, with what seems to be an article that appears in the press every single day, I think Superintendent Truitt talked about the OEC studies. We see states are really revisiting how they're tackling cell phone use. We have school districts that are rethinking how they are focusing on cell phone policies. Certainly research now about the harm that cell phones have caused to our children's mental health. We actually elected to postpone giving our son a cell phone. And as you can imagine, there was no consistency in how we treated the two siblings, which creates its own tension in our family. But through the process of grappling with whether our son should receive a cell phone or not, I think it's hard to ignore how the pandemic essentially supercharged our use of devices. And yes, I am amazed at the use of technology and what it can do to educate our children. Khan Academy has been extraordinary for us as a family. I'm surprised at the things you can learn on YouTube to educate our children. But from my perspective, I think we've also created a phone-based childhood and even a phone-based school experience that certainly needs to be revisited, which is why I'm excited about this conference and looking at the ways that we can provide appropriate guidance to school districts on the use of cell phones. And so with the return back to the school year, I think it's critical and vital that we start having serious conversations about rethinking the use of cell phones in our school. And that's why Senator Bergen and I sponsored the study Cell Phone Use in Schools that would charge the Department of Public Instruction in consultation with the Department of Health and Human Services and the University of North Carolina School of Education to study cell phone policies in school. But we may not need to do that, Krista, because I think we're doing that today. And so I will conclude by saying this. I think Superintendent Truitt touched upon this. I think as much as we will focus on children and the use of cell phones, it's ultimately adults that will have to lead and model behavior. I will readily admit, as I have a few times already, and as my children point out, that I have challenges with using cell phones as well. But so do teachers, principals, and administrators. And I will share with you during a recent conference that some parents at our high school had with our high school principal. A parent raised the issue that because they made a decision not to provide a cell phone to their child, that child was not receiving communications from the extracurricular activities because the kids were using Instagram as a way to communicate with the child. And so that in and of itself raised issues about how we are using social media and cell phones to communicate with their children. And so I share this with you because adults and administrators alike need to rethink how we use cell phones in both modeling and how we carry about the way we communicate with each other. And so I am very excited about today. I think there's going to be some great opportunities to come up with some great solutions Krista, thank you very much, and I will turn it over to my esteemed colleague, Senator Bergen.
First of all, thank you to the Friday Institute for allowing us to be here. And Jay and I are dear friends, and we were together the other night. We both received an award from we are co-chairs of the Early Childhood Caucus and spent a lot of time working on that, and they recognized us for that work. And for the last 6 years, I've been going around the state with now Secretary Cody Kinsley talking about mental health. My background is in insurance, and I'm a business guy involved in a lot of different businesses, but I served on a hospital board for 15 years. We had a 25-bed mental health facility, and served on the SHIC, State Health Coordinating Council, and all through my, career, mental health has been something that has really concerned me, just as I've seen what's happened to people and people that don't have issues dealt with or aren't helped or don't get proper medication. And so as we've gotten into this and started looking, I always look for cause and effect. I always want to know why something happened. I was telling a few folks earlier that a couple of weeks ago I was at Central Prison interviewing 3 death row inmates because I wanted to know what we could have done in their early childhood to have made a difference. And that's I'm going to write Christy, we're going to write all that up and put it, this is Christy Darling, that's my LA. If you ever need me, call her, because she keeps the calendar and the schedule and everything, and she's here. But Christy, I've been pondering this, and we're going to write up a big report about it because it was fascinating, and I'm going to go back but it ties into this. Now I'm a little older, so I have my original bag phone. Do y'all know what a bag phone is? I started to go to the office and get it because it is in my office. If you ever come to the LOB, ask me to see my first phone. It's a bag phone. So, I've traveled the world without a cell phone. And now, can you all imagine going anywhere in the world and not having your cell phone? Like, I was in Charlotte yesterday, and I had to use my cell phone for directions and stuff. Nobody, who has a map in your car? Nobody. We don't give them out anymore. We don't buy them anymore. One guy said, well, I've still got an Atlas. But we count on these things, and honestly, they're like a drug. We're addicted to them, and we need to be talking about this. So anyway, as Secretary Kinsley and I went all over the state talking about mental health and talking to people, I would make comments about we've got to do something about cell phones. Now, our kids, I'm the proud parent of 3 millennials, and I have 4 grandchildren. Our children did not get a phone until they started driving. Now, their friends did, but they were the flip phones and stuff, so they weren't the technology we have today. You know what the average age that a child gets a phone today in the United States? 10 years old. If they're affluent, it's an affluent family, it's 7 years old. I've got studies laying on my desk, and Catherine and she's a dear friend, and I just admire her so much, and we talked about some of these things. We exposed kids, I think, too early to technology. I think we're stymieing their imagination, their creativity, and everything. And I want us to back off and look at it and see if we need to do something different. One of the meetings we were at, I was talking about phones, and after I finished speaking, a young lady came up to the secretary and I. She's 15 years old. She wouldn't look me in the eye. She had her phone in her hand because I'd said, I don't think we ought to have phones in schools. And she said, if you took my phone away from me, I would die. And she had some folks there, and she has some issues, and I talked to one of the people that was there with her, and I talked to her a long time, and I said, tell me about your friends. And she said, they're all on here, and think about the idea of the young people that can't look people in the eye and communicate to them, and I see that quite a bit. So that's why I'm concerned about this. We have to go back and say, in the long run, what is the absolute best for our children so that they can be successful, happy, productive, loving adults and work together. Now, we don't agree on everything all the time at the Senate, do we? We still like each other, though, don't we? Well, in fact, I love Jay. Jay's a great guy. He's got a beautiful family. And, as a Christian, I'm going to love Jay no matter if we're going to disagree on anything. And we don't usually disagree on much, some things, but not a lot of the big important things. So this is really, really important. And I'm just, I didn't know how many people were going to be here today, really. I'm excited that this many people are here. I'd love to meet every one of you and hear why you're so interested in this. But folks, I think that we have the opportunity to set North Carolina apart in a lot of different ways in education. Now, I think we ought to change education completely. I think we ought to go to statewide year-round schools. I think we ought to start school at age 3. I think we ought to move the 11th and 12th grade to the community colleges. I think we need to completely change education because we're not keeping up with the world. And I think North Carolina has a history of being first, and I'd like to be first to change some of these things. So I'm excited to hear everything that happens today. I'd love to talk to you, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Thank you. So, to put a finer point on a couple of things that have always been raised, I don't know that I need to necessarily address this question because we've done some nice framing already. So why this topic and why now? And just to preview a little bit about what we're going to see today. Are we going to say that phones are ruining everything for all of the teens all of the time? I mean, that would be a highly one-dimensional way of looking at this issue. And are we going to say that there's nothing to worry about, that we don't have to have this kind of concern because the concerns that we're seeing are actually rooted elsewhere and they're not rooted in cell phones and we just shouldn't worry about anything? And I think that is also a one-dimensional way to look at this question and this issue. And I will add to that because you're here and you're in the Friday Institute, we pride ourselves on a sense of excellence. We're going to thread this needle perfectly today. And we're going to get everything right. And also, no, we're not going to do that too, but we are starting a conversation, and we would like to have that conversation informed by a diverse range of perspectives. So I want to also just hold a few things in our minds together that are seemingly contradictory, but let's just hold them together and see the extent to which we might agree with these 3 statements. The internet and cell phones represent transformative technologies that are reshaping society and education. I don't think we can argue against a statement like that. We've seen new things happen in classrooms and in society because of the internet and because of the way that they're delivered to us in our pockets today. And though the internet and cell phones are powerful tools for change, their misuse can hinder learning, can contribute to social disconnection and distraction. And I think that there's a lot about this statement that I agree with as well. And many of us have had those instances of sitting somewhere and someone trying to get our attention, and then that next thing comes. Mom, put your phone away. Dad, you're looking at your phone, you're not watching. Teacher, did you hear what I said? Professor, I'm trying to get your attention. And by connecting people and resources in new ways, the internet and cell phones are empowering individuals and communities to participate fully or more fully in society and education. And to put a finer point on this one, I will say that Karen Hollerbrand's story is actually quite telling. Because part of the reason why when we travel outside North Carolina, people highlight the strength of the Friday Institute, it's because we run online courses for teachers and educators that they can enroll in for any time, any place learning and get teacher professional learning and development on the fly in a moment when an issue is striking to them as their most pressing point of need. And that's why the Friday Institute, part of why we're known around the world, because we're putting learning in people's pockets as well. So, to also just complicate the issue a little more, to ask kind of an important question about this issue, what we're looking at on the screen now is a map, and it's a map that is displaying communities in North Carolina that are served by broadband internet access, and you're looking at that in gray. Communities in blue, the blue dots, underserved, and communities in red, no service, no broadband access. So that if we were to remove cell phones tomorrow, for some people, we would be removing their only form of high-speed internet. And so that's why it's important to ask these questions and to also look at what angles we're trying to be informed within and how we kind of bring a lot of seemingly disparate ideas together to do what we ultimately all agree on, which is that students and families should be served by education and our education systems in North Carolina. So, with that in mind, today's agenda is going to bring some of these voices together in some ways that we've intentionally selected. We are going to spend the rest of this session this morning talking about perspectives around our community. We're a little bit behind schedule, but don't worry, Emma knows how to work her magic to get us back on schedule. At 11 a.m., we have some researchers from UNC who will be presenting about youth development and social considerations. Lunch, we will have some programming at lunch because we are state funded, and in order to use funds for anything in this work, we have to have programming associated with it. We're nothing if not compliant. 12:45, State of the State Models and Trends. We've got some of the national organizations, including CETA and EdNC. CETA and Excel and Ed, thank you, that will be talking about State of the State. We have a panel at 1:15, Youth Engagement and Empowerment. Some researchers from across the U.S. who look at the ways in which youth are empowered and engaged because of their access to the internet and access to mobile devices. We've got a panel of educators who will be reflecting with us from in North Carolina as superintendents and principals that will be coming and joining us this afternoon. And then we'll wrap up with some reflective questions from them.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the really warm and meaningful welcome this morning. What I love about it is that it humanizes it for us. It makes it very personal. And so what I'd love for you to do at your tables is find a piece of paper that's blank, just has the real issues, real data logo on it, and take a minute to reflect yourself. Why does this topic matter for you? Who do you think about? What do you think about when you think about cell phones and students and mental health and having access to technology that way? Why does it resonate? What experience compels you maybe to take action even? And so just take a minute to reflect on those types of questions. We've heard a lot from our leaders this morning about why it means something for them. And I'd love to have you get a chance to reflect for a minute or two and share out at your table. Go ahead and talk at your table, share an idea or two. We will start to hear across our community in a couple of minutes.
From the microphone. I'm thinking a lot about brain development what got me interested in the science of reading in the first place. It's just the magic of what's happening, what can happen. And cell phones early on can be a hindrance to that. I'm thinking about the tension between access to information and the ability to analyze and critically engage with information. And so phones and technology do give us great access, but then it's also like we're less capable of discerning, information and what it's really telling us and what it's not telling us. We see this at the board table all the time, where we'll get data, and then what is it really telling us? What should it tell us, and is it able to tell us? And then I'm also thinking about the access controls. I don't want to lose that access control. When they have a phone, I can reach them. Yeah. I mean, the safety and emotional wellness. The safety for me changed. There was a suspected shooter. It was an armed person on Unload campus. This was even before the last incident. There was someone with a gun on Unload campus, and so they all were sheltered in place. And what I realized, I have Dr. Taylor's cell phone number. I have Dr. Jordan, she's our principal, and I've got my son. And what I realized is I can't really text anybody because I texted my son once, and then I said, I want you to pay attention to your teacher, pay attention to your surroundings. Text me if you need, like, if an emergency. But I didn't want to bother Dr. Jordan. I didn't want to bother Dr. Taylor.
Enough on their hands.
Right. And so I don't know how important the phone is. The morbid side of it is it's the way to say I love it. But it's not really going to help me in that situation. So I don't know how much it says. My perspective changed on that. But, I texted my 16-year-old just now. I'm not going to be able to get your brother. Can you get him from school?
Yeah, definitely. I would throw grandchildren in there because I've got the next generation, they're 3 and 1, and I'm wondering how they know they're going to navigate all these things and how it's going to affect their development and what and throw AI into that because for them it's going to be a whole different set of notes, we don't get a handle on this right now. I think the next thing is going to be hard.
We're talking about cell phones, we're talking about email, house, I've had to learn how to evaluate information, right? Our children have texted us the same thing our children. So I think it's much broader than cell phones. I think cell phones is the immediate symptom of some of the things that we've seen in schools. We've got cell phones. But what has happened is, where children can access outside of classroom really and then how do we get into navigate that? Our children will always be the workplace is I've got my computer. I literally can't work now. I don't come to work every day with my phone in my laptop. We had a consumer Wi-Fi I took all of my Zoom calls on my phone, right? It's the same thing. I'm passionate about technology. I'm also passionate about sharing what you say.
Folks, I hate to cut off the buzz here, but I'd like to bring us back together again because there's such great conversations that y'all are having. One of the voices that I want to make sure that we hear from, though, is the student voice. So we have a couple of videos here. I'm going to play this first one for you. We can hear the senior, her reflection on cell phones and what that experience is for her.
I use my cell phone for like recording videos, taking photos, calling and texting people, and just general contact stuff. I use it for emails. I also use my phone for social media and consuming streaming services. I also use my phone for searching stuff online, stuff like using a compass or using my calculator I use more than the compass. I also use Google Maps. Video games. There are some video games I use on my iPhone. It's a useful tool. It just provides a lot of entertainment. I mean, there's only so much you can do without your cell phone right now. Like you can go out with friends and stuff, but like kind of where do you go, you know? They connect people. They provide a ton of entertainment. It can let you have basic tools in just like everyday situations, like a timer or an alarm. Definitely can, you know, make you feel better about yourself or worse about yourself. Well, it stops people from hanging out outside of their house or, you know, just with their friends. Because again, like what is there to do? Cell phones provide you a ton of entertainment, so it kind of makes interacting with friends less important, it seems, even though it's really important. Yeah, you can get addicted to social media, and if you post stuff and you receive a bad reaction or you don't receive any reaction, then that can make you feel really bad. There can be a lot of drama. It also can draw away focus because online content recently has been more focused towards, you know, spontaneity and like creating a ton of content instead of long form content.
We have an Enloe student here today. Her name is Lucy Ashburn, and I would love to invite you, Lucy. You can stand where you are. You're welcome to come and join me up here. But I'd love if you can to share a little bit about your experience with having a cell phone, what it's like at school, what it's like at home. We'll just start there. What is your reflection?
So my teachers will sometimes ask us to use our phones in class for something helpful, like filling out a Google form or doing like a Kahoot or GameKit on the phone or computer. And I find like that can be helpful with technology, but also there are some times where you'll see students just like on their phone in class and they're not engaged with the teacher or the other students in the classroom, and that can affect them, but also the others like in their group or around them or at their table. And I think that it's not necessarily good to just like take away the phone completely, but if you have like some regulation, then you can have a time where the student can like have a time to check their phone. Did my mom text me? Did my dad text me? like yesterday I was in class and my dad texted me, "Oh, do you like this from the grocery store?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that's fine." And so like I feel like that's good to be able to have like something in your pocket. You can text your mom, you can text your dad if you need something at school, and that's helpful technology. But also like the constant feeling like, oh, did someone text me? Is my friend texting me? Like that's always there because you always have it in your pocket. And in class, that can be hard to like experience trying to stay engaged.
Awesome, great, thank you so much, Lucy. Appreciate your reflection there for us. We hear a lot about what the adults have to say when it comes to cell phones and regulations or policies, but it's really important for us to also be hearing from those students who are in those spaces as well. So we're going to spend a little bit of time doing that in just a minute. We have some perspectives here that are linked on the table on your agenda document as well. I'll post them here on the screen in just a minute, but I want to also gather the district perspective and the state perspective. So Dr. Vanessa Wren, if you would be willing to share a little bit about what you are hearing and what districts are saying and they're struggling with or trying to problem solve around. I had the pleasure of working with Vanessa at DPI several years ago. She's been a teacher, a principal, CTE director, CTO, and now is our state CIO. So we're thrilled to have you here to join us in the conversation too.
Thank you, Emma. I'm delighted to be here, and I want to thank the Friday Institute for delving in. It was probably about a month ago I called Krista. I don't know, it was a late evening, I was driving, I think I was on I-85, and I was like, Krista, we've got to learn more about this. I'm watching what's happening across the nation. You know, as I've been in education for 20-some years, and I've spent a good part of that working to put technology in schools, working to connect our schools with broadband, connect our communities. So seeing this happen is a shift, and so I think it's a very complex, but something that we can put a common sense approach to. The benefits of technology are not going away, right? The workforce is totally dependent on technology. The skills of our students to use technology is critical. We were just discussing at our table, we had a Wi-Fi outage in our building and we were dead in the water. We could do nothing. We couldn't communicate. We could not produce. And the same thing happens in our schools. And I'm thinking, okay, well, I've been partly responsible for that because I've made sure and advocated to get technological devices in our children's hands. But it's also, we all know the good, but we also know that, and we're seeing the negative effects. And one of the things I've said, we've got to get to the root cause of this, because emotional and mental health is certainly something we're seeing an issue with. So if the issue is social media, how do we get to that root cause? Now, parents have tools where if they do provide a cell phone to their child and they make that decision, they make the decision of the age, they can remove all social media from that phone. I think digital literacy to parents is important. We have to take on more responsibility to train parents on how they can be more actionable when children do have access to technology. I have a sister with 4 children. I have 3 children, so I've had to navigate this personally. But I have a sister of 4 children who are all between the ages of elementary and high school now, and she's asking me, how do I get them off social media? How do I know what they're doing? And so we're, teaching my own family what tools are available because they don't want them to have the peer pressure that comes along with that. So I think that's something that we all have to be aware of and understand. We've been watching what's been occurring in Florida. Certainly right now there are, because if social media is the root cause, let's look at that, right? Because it's the feeling of, we heard in the video, if you post something you don't get likes and how it makes you feel. I have a daughter who is she's 19, just turned 20, and the peer pressure of how you look is so important because they see this all the time. And so we also have to teach our children that what you see a lot is not real, right? And not everyone's going to look like Kim Kardashian because you just don't do that, and teaching them that part. So it's part of education overall is self-regulation. And teaching children how to self-regulate is part of school. 99% of our schools have some type of cell phone policy. Most of them, if they adopted a formal policy, they took board policy 4318, which has been around a long time. I'm going to date myself. When we first adopted board policy 4318, it was to prevent laser use in schools. That is now policy 4318, and it's around the communication device and mobile devices in school. So some schools in our state have taken that policy, Carteret County, Transylvania County, and have adopted that to include when is the appropriate use of a cell phone at school. And most of our LEAs have that policy in place. If they haven't adopted a formal board policy, there is behavior policy in place in about 100% of our schools. When can you have a cell phone available? Bell to bell, in most all schools, cell phones are not available. They must have them put away. I was talking to the tech director in Mooresville Graded District, Scott Smith, and he said, yes, you can share this. They have a little guide of if you get a warning the first time you pull your cell phone out and it's a time where you can't use it. The second time, it's a meeting with your parent. The third time, it is ISS. And then it escalates from there if it continues. That is not uncommon. Our schools have those in place. We also, and this is one of the most novel things, and I really love this, Union County schools. They are a mix, like many of our schools, that are partly rural, partly suburban. And in a school, most of the time, you can't get any internet connection anyway, right? It's like you walking into a mall. You can lose internet connection when you're in a building. And I thought their approach was really good. Now, let me frame it with this. In Union County schools, they do have technology devices that are available to children, iPads or Chromebooks, depending on the grade, that can be used for co-intelligence, right? And I think of my technology as part of my co-intelligence. But what they felt like, that there was an extreme problem with safety and security. So they created a network called UCPS, Union County Public Schools, that allows cell phones to operate with voice and text only for students, but it can't operate as a smartphone. So they can't stream media, they can't go to a browser, but they can text and they can get a phone call. And he said their teachers really advocated for that because they've said, inside of a school, there's really no communication. If a communication system goes down, they felt that was important. Another way that they are using that is they have many students now, if you're diabetic, you wear a Dexcom device, and they have seen a surge with elementary children, and parents want to check on their second grader's blood level. Well, that Dexcom device will text a parent if a student's blood sugar is getting low. And they said that it solved those problems. They were trying to isolate that out. And as we now treat diabetes more with Dexcom devices, and particularly in elementary children, it was a big a win for them. And so I felt like that was a really, and they also have a policy that cell phones have to be put away in a classroom, bell to bell. Children can have it out at lunch if they're in high school only. And at other places they cannot. But they can text and they can communicate. And they said it was their teachers like that. Their teachers needed that as well. And their parents feel comfortable with that. So I felt like that was one of the more novel approaches that we have. So social media is not available. And in case you don't know, any device that we provide to a student that is a Chromebook or iPad, they're filtered at home and at school. And so it blocks out social media. We know one of the challenges is children using social media on phones. So I do think that there is an opportunity for us to do more work about understanding the harms of being 100% connected, the harms of social media, and being able to help navigate some policy, and if not policy, guidance around how to best use technology. Technology isn't going anywhere. Our children need to have technology skills, even to be competitive in school. And so I think there's many approaches that we can do. And then one more thing. How many of you ever had to use the app Remind, right? Your teachers, remember the Remind app, and there's so many of those. And we used to advocate for that. So we were pushing that from an educational stance. And then, of course, we want parents to be able to see how students are achieving in schools. I recently pulled a study out of our current student information system to find out how do parents access students' achievement? How do they look at their grades if they're absent, if they showed up on time? 98% of parents go through the mobile app. And so, we talk about, it can be used for good. We've got to learn more about the bad. How do we navigate that and help do that? I am very pleased that we did not use the word banning today. You know, banning also can be very problematic. I can remember teaching in school when we banned hats. And then it's funny, we banned hats. You couldn't wear a hat. And actually, I think I was assistant principal, and I was in charge of discipline, as most assistant principals are. I spent my day working with children because they were wearing a hat. And there were so many better ways to use my time. So I'll just leave it with that, and I'm thankful that we can come up with good common sense approaches.
Let's give Lucy and Dr. Wren a round of applause. Thank you so much for being here and being part of the discussion. I definitely would encourage you to check out some of the anecdotes that we were able to collect from students, from parents, from teachers. Some of the parents and teachers wore multiple hats or both hats, right? It's a complex thing that we're trying to address here because we understand that, like you said, a ban versus a policy leads to different things and different results. And so it's important for us to consider that. There are also a few descriptions of power down and put away, or a red light, green light system that folks are piloting and trying in their schools and districts. So you might want to check those out to learn a little bit more about it. This afternoon, we'll hear from a district who is choosing to pilot a yonder pouch, where that's locked their phone during the school day. And so we'll explore more of those strategies as we hear from other folks. We're going to move into our panel this morning, and so I'll have Krista invite those folks, those panelists, to come up, and we'll go ahead and move into our conversation about youth development and social consideration.
While we transition to the panel, feel free to just stand and stretch, but we're going to move ahead and right into the panel as well. As Emma's already mentioned, if anyone needs a bathroom break, the bathrooms are down the hall and to the left, but we'll go ahead and move into the panel right now. So we'll go ahead and move into the panel. This morning we saw a wonderful example of two of our state senators, a Democrat and a Republican, reaching across the aisle to bring together some visioning for this event. So once again, we thank you. And in that spirit, we are reaching across the interstate to our neighbors at UNC Chapel Hill. That's not always the friendliest of exchanges, but we welcome you to the Friday Institute, and we welcome you to our programming today. So I'm going to do some introductions of our panelists as well. Their biographies are long, and I've even edited them down a little bit, but just so you have a sense of how accomplished and how amazing their research is, I am going to take a moment. I'll read fast, you can listen fast, but the bios are impressive. Mitch Prinstein is the Chief Science Officer of the American Psychological Association and serves as the John Van Cedars Distinguished Professor of Psychology and Neuroscience and the co-director of the Winston National Center on Technology, Youth, Brain, and Psychological Development at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. That's many titles wrapped into one, and some of the longest titles they've seen. Welcome, Mitch. Mitch's research has examined interpersonal models of internalizing symptoms and health risk behaviors among adolescents, with a specific focus on the unique role of off and online peer relationships in the developmental psychopathology of depression and self-injury. He is a board-certified clinical psychologist and has published over 200 scientific manuscripts and 12 books. Welcome, Mitch. Eva Telzer is a professor of psychology and neuroscience at UNC Chapel Hill and the co-director of the Winston National Center on Technology Use, Brain, and Psychological Development. Her research examines how social and cultural processes shape adolescent brain development with a focus on pro-social and risk-taking behaviors, family and peer relationships, and the role of social media in youth lives. She has authored over 200 publications and received numerous awards for her work. She is regularly featured as an expert in psychological science and in consultation to government agencies and nonprofit associations, as well as media appearances in the New York Times, NPR, CNN, ABC, CBS, and NBC. So I'm doing my best to put on my journalism hat today. Welcome, Eva. And Henry Willis is originally from Jackson, Mississippi, and received his PhD from clinical psychology at UNC Chapel Hill. Welcome home. Willis is a faculty member of clinical psychology at University of Maryland in College Park. He's the creator and director of the Cultural Resilience, Equity, and Technology Research Lab at UMD College Park. And his research focuses on exploring the relationship between online and offline racial discrimination and mental health outcomes among African American youth and young adults, understanding sociocultural protective factors and how they impact psychopathology within African Americans, creating cultural adaptations of evidence-based treatments, and utilizing mobile health technologies to increase access to mental health treatments for underserved populations. So this is our esteemed panel. Please welcome them with a round of applause. And I want to start by inviting each of you to just tell us a little bit about your research. And when you're speaking in front of public policy audiences and educators, what are the things that people most know about your work, and what are the things that are most important for them to know?
Hi, thanks so much for having us here. And yeah, there's been a lot of conversation recently about the research in this area. I would say that there are probably a few things that pop out the most. One is that a lot of what folks are talking about in the debate over whether social media is evil and whether kids' heads will explode if they watch 10 TikTok videos, is a little bit based on research that actually among scientists we consider to be a bit outdated right now, because it's research that's focused on screen time. And screen time is a very messy and non-specific measure of what might be beneficial or harmful for kids' development, because screen time is different for every kid. And if they're going online and reading the New York Times for 10 hours a day and talking with their friends about it, that would be great. I don't know any teens who are using their screens for that purpose, but ideally that would be much better than kids who are going online and they're being exposed through algorithms to sites that are teaching them how to cut themselves or engage in disordered eating behavior and how to shield that from their parents. So what a lot of the research that we've been involved in, I don't want to speak for Eva, but in the center that we're co-directing, is really to look at the specific kinds of functions, content, and features embedded within social media that may prove helpful to different aspects of kids' development, and maybe differently for some kids rather than others, and may be harmful. So one of the things that we've done has really been to outline some very specific and reasonable ways that we could create guardrails that help kids to get the most they can from the best aspects and shield them from the worst aspects.
Thank you. Eva, that sounds like your cue.
Thank you. So another really important thing to consider during especially the adolescent period is this is a developmental period when not only social media and technology use is increasing a lot. So for example, Mitch and I have collected data from teens in terms of not only their screen time and how much time they spend on their phones, which on average is over 8 hours a day. So the mere quantity of the time they're spending online is a lot. They're also getting buzzed constantly on their phones. They're getting hundreds and hundreds of notifications a day. And so these types of behaviors, as Mitch said, it really depends on what they're doing on social media, but it's increasing during adolescence. And it's increasing in a developmental period when the brain is undergoing more reorganization and development than any other developmental period other than infancy. And so the adolescent brain is in this really important developmental phase when it is so sensitive to its social environment and the cues that it's receiving from the environment, and when those cues are potentially maladaptive, it can shape the developing brain. When those cues are potentially positive, it can really help and create a thriving adolescent. And so one of the things that we're really interested in the Winston Center is understanding the intersection of the developing brain and adolescents' online and social media behaviors to understand when these social media behaviors might be maladaptive and appear in the biological makings of the developing brain, or when those social media experiences may be buffered or potentially positive for youth.
And Henry, over to you.
Yes, and first of all, I'm happy to be back in North Carolina. Even I'm on the other side of the bridge. I think it's still friendly territory, hopefully. But I'm really happy that Eva brought up that critical period of adolescent development, because we also know that that's a critical period for identity formation, especially for youth of color. And now that technology and social media is so embedded into all of our lives, but especially our teen lives, you know, that these are also critical areas where they're exploring their identity. And it has a lot of benefits in terms of helping them connect to the same race peers, especially if they're in communities or contexts where they might be the one or one of few kids of color in their communities. But it also exposes them to a lot of specific risks that, you know, may not be risk factors for other teens, such as being exposed to online racism. And we also know in this election period, now that we have the first Black woman president running, that we can expect to see more instances of online racist content online, especially because we saw that rise in 2008 and 2012. And so, my research looks at how can, one, how do these experiences impact youth of color? And we know that exposure to this kind of racist content can lead to higher levels of anxiety, depression, and traumatic stress responses that might even lead to higher levels of suicidal ideation. But we also look at how do youth of color remain resilient. So how do things like their racial identity beliefs and the positive ways they're using social media and technology help them navigate these kind of very tricky and kind of muddy waters. And when I'm talking to policymakers, one of the things that, the first question is, so what do we do? How do we help our kids? And I've learned in this work that, these teens have to be at the table when we're designing and kind of thinking about these solutions. So a lot of the work that me and my teams have done is have youth at the table to, one, help us talk about these topics, learn strategies, but also really develop interventions. So we've begun to develop a variety of social media and technology platforms and interventions that are informed by youth of color, so that we can equip them with the tools that they need, but also make sure that their voices are reflected in these different strategies.
I want to ask a question because what's come up that I'm reflecting on based on your opening remarks is the idea of the push-pull. There's a push-pull aspect to everything that you're already talking about, which is that kind of identity formation and the need for a healthy identity development at a time when adolescents are involved, particularly at a time of separation. I am a parent of a middle schooler right now, and that period, I often say that parenting is a series of navigating separation from your kid. Superintendent Truitt mentioned this morning, that this kind of need to separate and this need to form an independent identity that is developmental. At the same time, I'm really taken in by the idea, or it's standing out to me, the importance of a way that we are understanding their development so that they aren't harmed in this aspect of separating and forming an identity. So what thoughts do you have about how we can make sense as non-experts in the room about their developmental needs during this critical period?
Yeah, I think, this is an interesting dilemma because we are not all focused on that goal in the same way. If we were using the technology that's available to improve adolescent development, and that was the goal and the motivation of whether it's the platforms or the devices, then I think that wonderful, wonderful things could happen. So one of the things that we're kind of wrestling with in this particular situation is the potentially opposing goals of making a profit by using kids' data, keeping kids engaged on platforms or devices for as long as possible, in order to make that profit. And kids own strengths and limitations at this developmental age. My kids are in 7th and 9th grades right now, so I talk about this all day and then I live it all at night. So, I'm kind of right there.
We can all weep together.
Yeah, it's very, very challenging. We, in our household, we have taken the science and we've set up guardrails, barriers, yet also some opportunities for them to free explore, at home, not during class time, to have dialogue and to really teach skills that I wish were taught in school districts, to teach competence on how to navigate a world where devices and social media will and forever exist, and how to navigate that in a safe way. I often think about it as we don't give kids of age the keys to a car without teaching them the skills to protect themselves and others on the road. We shouldn't give kids keys to the World Wide Web without similarly teaching them those skills. And I think that there are, in my role at the American Psychological Association, we've laid out an area of about 10 areas of competency that if kids were demonstrated competent in those areas, we think it would be much safer and appropriate for them to be able to use a lot of these platforms. But without those, it's a little bit tricky, and in particular because remember that kids' brains are developed in ways that make them highly sensitive to some things and incapable of resisting impulses to follow in some ways. I'll stop there.
Sounds like your cue again, Eva.
Yeah, Mitch really puts it perfectly with sort of this duality of what the goals of the companies are with the needs of our adolescents. And adolescents' brains are changing in really remarkable ways. They're not broken. Their brains are actually very adaptable, and given the right context, adolescents can thrive. And so part of that is exploring their environment in very healthy ways, taking healthy risks, engaging in ways to express their identity in a very healthy way that is not necessarily completely restricted by a parent or caregiver or people in their environment, because adolescents are seeking that autonomy. And so I think a big piece of it is, whether it's parents or teachers or other important adults in adolescents' lives, is really having those open conversations to give teens some sense of autonomy and also the skill set to navigate some of their online experiences, whether that is being able to identify misinformation and disinformation, knowing what to do if they are exposed to discrimination or cyber hate, and other forms of just skill sets that adolescents really need in order to navigate their social media experiences in a way that is optimized for the developmental state that they're in.
And you mentioned cyber hate. I don't know if that's where you were going to jump in, Henry, but I was interested in hearing you elaborate a little bit more about where we might have special concern for some groups more than others, because you opened by talking about there can be a racialized component to this conversation where some people might experience discrimination in a different kind of way. And I don't know if that's where you were about to jump in, but I also invite you to speak to that issue from your research work and anything else that's relevant at this moment.
Yeah, so before I talk a little bit about some of the risk with online racism, I agree with everything Mitch and Eva said, and it highlights the importance of, we also need funding for public health campaigns to spread that awareness. So kind of like what you're saying, how do we get this information, or, those folks who might not understand, and especially for parents and already under-resourced and stressed communities, is one, hard to know what you don't know, especially when it comes to technology and social media. I thought I was really good at it, being a young person that grew up a little bit with social media, but the teens that I work with prove me wrong all the time in terms of what I don't know in terms of social media platforms, trends, etc. So I think as much as we can find ways to increase access to like the competencies that Mitch mentioned, especially in communities where, again, there's not that awareness of that nuance between the risk and the benefits of social media is really important. And again, kind of speaking to those under-resourced communities and marginalized communities, we know that teens, especially teens of color, often are exposed to many instances of racial discrimination in both online and offline settings. And we've seen recent studies show that teens on average might experience 5 racist encounters a day, with most of them happening over the internet. And so again, it really speaks to that just really urgent public health need to find ways to, one, try to reduce exposure to this content, but also knowing that it's very hard to remove it altogether. So how can we teach kids those coping skills, like Eva mentioned, in terms of what to do when they're exposed to that, whether it's privacy policies, or even just awareness of how algorithms and how you're interacting with peers and other things on these platforms might increase risk for exposure to certain things.
We're going to open up for questions in a few moments, but I do want to turn our attention to a little bit more focus on today's topic, because what we're asking today is the question of what might guide the appropriate kinds of school-based and local policies that can help inform and support what's happening during the school day itself. So with that in mind, if you were given the magic wand around what's the right kind of way that we should both set a policy and enact it in a school-based setting, what would your magic wand let you do?
Yeah, we're getting asked this question more and more these days from more and more communities, so sorry if this is a little sounding canned, but I think there are a few things that are some low-hanging fruit. One is for schools to not make assignments due at midnight, because it allows kids to stay online until midnight, and of course, while they're completing their homework, they're also getting on social media. Why is this important? Because if kids are not getting 8 to 9 hours of sleep, it's changing the size of their brains, it's changing their functioning the next day, it's changing their emotional health. So very easy, all assignments are due at 9 o'clock, done. I mean, that's easier said than done, I realize, but it's the kind of change that can affect quite a lot. The second is, we know from kids' brain development that for all of our brain development, no matter how good we think we are at multitasking, there's no such thing as multitasking, it's task shifting back and forth. Kids are not as good at task shifting. So if they have access to a device, including their own personal device, and they're able to do that during school, it is probably going to be related to distraction, which is probably going to affect their school performance. We also know that it is likely changing their ability to develop the social skills needed that adolescence is a hallmark time for, to develop more complex relationships. So no phones or devices during instructional time at school. Does it help them to have the phones during the 3 minutes between classes? Does it help them to have phones when it's time to get picked up and tell their parent that they're staying for practice? We don't know. So one of the things that we're doing is we're now working with school districts in many states around the country who are wanting to know what policies make sense, and the answer is no one's tested that. So we are collecting data, and we're doing it remotely, and it's easy, and it's fast, before, during, after policies that are happening, so we can say, yes, it's critical that they have that 3-minute time to check in. No, it's not. Yes, they should have the devices. No, So we're actually collecting those data, so hopefully within a year, we'll be able to say scientifically, this is the ideal policy. But right now, we know many districts are struggling with these exact questions.
Mitch said it all. I don't have anything to add.
Yeah, likewise. I was just, thinking just the benefits of potential, like having those protected time bursts where they can use phones and technology to maybe, again, kind of reduce that distraction or, decrease that kind of FOMO that teens will feel when they have it. And it also makes me think of the potential of, how can we integrate technologies in instruction, at least in small ways, again, to kind of, bridge that gap. But like Mitch said, we have a lot of testing to go to see what actually works in the long term.
I'll just say that I agree 100% with what Henry is saying. I think that no social media ever until you're 50, policy is going to likely hurt those who are particularly from racial, ethnic, sexual, gender, religious, minoritized backgrounds who are finding critical support from others for the stress that they are experiencing. There's no evidence that they have to receive that support during the school day versus after. We don't know that yet, but to shut everything down until you're in college probably is going to do some harm to those kids who are really getting benefit from finding others with a shared identity.
And let's be honest, it's not like the 50-year-olds out there are getting this right perfectly every point at every moment of the day. We have some questions. Senator Chaudhary, we invite questions as well at this time. Just for the recording, because there's some media here, I want to try to rephrase some of the questions so we catch it. Although I'm not going to get it perfectly all the time. But the first question was around guardrails and safeguards on the phones themselves. What can empower parents, maybe educators, to set some better guardrails? Mitch, I know you mentioned kind of the 10 criteria. I don't know if that's what speaks to this issue, but we open up and invite that as well, and then we'll get to the other questions.
Oh, yeah, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the media literacy aspect that you brought up and kind of how do we give kids those skills. So actually me and a colleague at the University of Southern California, Dr. Brendisha Tynes, she's led a lot of this work on looking how digital media literacy can be taught to youth of color to help them combat just, not only regular online stressors, but also exposure to online racism. And in some of our early research, we found that some of these digital media literacy skills actually do help protect those kids when they're exposed to online racism, and it's actually related to lower levels of things such as anxiety and PTSD symptoms. And so some of the work that we're actually doing now is developing a critical media literacy platform for school-based kids. So right now we're in year 2 of the project, and this platform is getting ready to be piloted in schools in LA and in Detroit. So that's going to be hopefully another toolkit that educators and parents will have access to in the future.
Are there any follow-ups around? Go ahead, Mitch, and then we'll just catch some follow-ups.
That it's wonderful that there are programs like this being developed because there's not as much out there. There are some school-facing ones on Common Sense Media for elementary, middle, and high school, and they're developmentally based, so those can be a really helpful resource. I wish you did not need a PhD in computer science to figure out the iPhone controls for your kids, but it is helpful to give parents resources available to show them that they can control which apps their kids download, at what time they use those apps, to whom they can communicate within those apps, what time the entire device shuts down, and so on. It's all in there. It's just so buried and it's so frustrating. It's important to help middle school and dare I say even elementary school parents to create a dialogue with other parents to say, I won't give my kid a device if you don't give your kids a device, because the number one reason why parents do it is because they don't want their kid to be the only one who's not doing it. So, and we have no data to say that waiting until you're on social media hurts kids in any way, shape, or form. So, in our family, for what it's worth, our kids have iPads. My daughter now has a watch, but they're not on social media. Texting, FaceTime, go for it. But that's not the same as social media.
Certainly don't wait till you're 50 to be on social media, right? And I think we all get that. Florida recently enacted a law where children must be the age of 14 to be on social media, and they are working with social media providers to enforce that. do you see any research around why 14 is the magic number? Now, that's the number that's the age that social media typically puts out that says you must be this age, but they weren't enforcing it. Any thoughts around that benchmark?
I would say there's no science to back up a specific age at which it's suddenly healthy or okay to use social media versus not. You don't wake up one day and suddenly have the competencies. In fact, 14, like that 13 to 14 age, is a very, very sensitive developmental period when the brain is in this sort of perfect state of flux, when really great experiences can really benefit a teen, but negative experiences can especially hurt a teen. And so, in fact, a 13, 14-year-old is more vulnerable than potentially a 10 or 11-year-old who's not in that really vulnerable developmental state. So we don't have the science to say that that's the age. We don't have the science to say that's not the age. We really just don't know. And I think these age-based policies are very challenging in order to really pick the right developmental age when adolescents wake up and they're suddenly competent. And so I think really having education starting at a very young age is the only real way to help them become a 14-year-old able to navigate that experience.
So I'm Laura Fogel. I am the director of the Media and Education Technology Resource Center for the College of Education. So I look at how instructional technology is integrated into instruction. I also am the founder and board chair of a digital equity nonprofit called Digital Durham that looks at digital equity issues in education and across different parts of our lives where it affects everything. And I really appreciate that Dr. Lizeski, right in part of the framing of today's discussion, brought up one of the aspects of the digital divide. And also, Dr. Willis, you were talking about how, some groups are impacted differently by social media. We also know that some of those disadvantaged groups have less access, right, to devices and internet and digital literacy training. So how can we create policies that aren't addressing just the needs of the majority, but are also addressing the needs of groups that have different access to the technology, and maybe inside the school building is the only time that they have access to broadband internet?
Easy question.
Yeah, very easy question. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is speaks to the need of solutions on a variety of levels, like you were kind of pointing out. We need solutions on the structural level to make sure those families that might not be able to afford the latest iPads and things or broadband internet, that those kids have access to that outside of the school as well as in the school, because again, it's still some of that development is going to be important in terms of, kids learning that digital technology literacy, or having those experiences to express their own creativity, being able to use technology in positive ways. So if they don't have access to that, then again, there's this group that's marginalized is going to be left behind over time. And at the same time, we still need those interventions at a community and family base to, again, educate parents and those families still about some of the risks associated that we've already brought up today. So those are, not perfect solutions for this very big problem, but some of the first things that came to mind.
I also want to invite more questions. Senator Berger, let me bring a mic. Jamie, you want to go first?
Hi. I've heard a lot of discussion today about, basically we're trying to protect, right? We're trying to protect young people from getting themselves into situations that they don't know how to handle. I am the parent of two daughters, one of whom is autistic. And I wonder if you have any insights into how to protect young people with disabilities. She's 25. I can't control everything she does, but she is exposed to a lot of negative things through social media and does not understand them or know how to deal with them.
I think that this is where primary education, you know, a universal education is so important to, you know, it's interesting, even as adults, we go on social media or we start using technology with an element of fascination and wonder. And many of the ways in which the brain is developed makes us automatically believe what we see, to assume that what we see from one person's comments must generalize to 50% of the nation. These are automatic things that we do, all of us. This is a different kind of social interaction than the social interaction that our brains were developed for. So we have to teach people, especially those who might not have the same kinds of experience or resources, to think about how do I interpret information in this context. Not everyone you see is a real human being. Not every comment you see reflects their genuine feelings and thoughts. Not everything is reflecting even their own personal beliefs or their just desire to get more likes. These are funny assumptions to have to make, but to have to override in our head. But we're at that point where we need to teach everybody these platforms were not made by really smart people just to be nice to youth. They were made for a profit. The reason why you're being encouraged to talk to this person is to keep you engaged on the platform, not because they are trying to make you a new friend. And I think if we teach elementary school kids that when they enter a world, this you know, cyber world, to have different set of assumptions, it might help buffering down the road when these kinds of things are.
Okay, question over here.
I'm glad you brought that up. I'm going to be at an AI conference next week in Alexandria, and they've already told us we're going to be talking about things we haven't even thought about yet. So keep thinking through that. Do you all put out any white papers on some of the things that you talked about, especially early childhood brain development? Because we've been looking at that for years, about those formative years. You know, they always say that women's brains are connected about 21, guys it's 25 to 30, and I know that there's a big impact. But do you all put out white papers or something that we can send to parents, and not a whole long research paper that they won't read, but a short paper that we could give to folks and say, these are the things you need to be concerned about? And it really concerns me. You said 8 hours a day is the average you're seeing. Think about what they're not doing during those 8 hours that they ought to be doing, like exercise, eating, social, you know, being outside. Thank you.
We do have some documents available, and you can get our contact info from teensintech.org. Also, through the American Psychological Association, we've put out quite specifically these very brief advisory documents that are translatable for everyone. They're not written in scientific ways. We have a few now that are available to use for to prompt parenting discussions, policy discussions, discussions in the home. So happy to pass those along if that would be useful.
Over here.
Hey, a lot of this conversation centers around doing less of the device. But when I think about the K-12 experience, some students haven't started, right? And we're talking about trying to preserve some developmental experience, but some students are deeply into it. What consideration do in-school practitioners need to have, like in casual reading, you come across things like dopamine replacement. There's the dopamine cycle. We know the psychology behind these things where you get some kind of action trigger reward. Jonathan and I talked about that. Like, what active strategies might we need to consider as we, okay, great, you can't use the phone in the classroom. Like, that's gonna cause brains that have developed to do things, and we need to be able to respond and replace that with some kind of strategy.
That's a great question. I think it's easier to plan for the rising youth who haven't yet had phones in their school all day or access to technology around the clock than to suddenly enforce this on them. I think that that's going to be a very big challenge for a lot of schools, and the teens are going to push back hard. I don't think I have the answer here, but I think I'm just going to reiterate what you're saying is there's a lot of science, some from our center, showing these dopamine responses in kids who eventually go on to have social media addiction, for example, they are showing differences in the reward centers of their brain from an earlier age. And so there is an addictive nature to it that is developing, we started at around 12 years of age, and their brains are helping us to understand who becomes addicted to social media. So there is certainly this addictive nature to it, and taking that device away from an addict is going to be a big challenge. I don't think I have the answer of what to do, except to agree with you that that is going to be a big piece of the puzzle here.
One of the things we know about addiction is, we do have screening items, happy to pass them along, to help folks self-identify, or parents or school personnel to, help to begin a dialogue with when kids might be experiencing addiction, and to help them engage in some daily monitoring. What are the thoughts, feelings, and experiences you're having when you're on, as soon as you get off, when you're not able to get on? And that's usually the process of starting to help folks to recognize the patterns. So when you take it away, they can say, actually, and we were just at a Board of Ed in Vermont, and the kids were getting up there and saying, yeah, it's 2 weeks in, and I'm looking at kids in the eye again, and I'm actually enjoying life, and I'm happier, and I'm not just scrolling mindlessly and seeing all the hate out there, and helping them engage in that monitoring. That way they can start recognizing, actually, you took it away, and I thought it would be horrible, but I'm kind of experiencing more joy and more social connection. So that's a good process to bring in.
And I'll just add one more anecdote. Mitch and I teach an undergrad class at UNC on tech and adolescent development. And one of our assignments is having all of the students not use social media or tech for 24 hours. And there's so much variability in their experiences, but the majority of them come after 24 hours and tell us great stories about being able to interact with their peers or get sleep or go get physical activity. And so I think there's more fear perhaps looking forward than once you look back after having implemented it. And also a lot of the students in our course, they're about 18 years old, so not so far away from being in high school themselves. And they say they wish that as high school students or middle school students that there had been policies to keep them off, and that their parents had not given them a phone and access so early. And so they look back and wish that they had had that.
Got more questions over here? I'll try to walk fast.
Good morning. Just reflecting on the conversation, is there an age that's too early for us to be able to start having these types of discussions? Because even as I was sitting here kind of jotting down notes, as early as kindergarten, we're introducing children to iPads and Chromebooks and those sorts of things to be able to complete assessments or to play games as rewards, those types of things. And so would it be advantageous for us as school districts to maybe look at even pre-K conversations with kids before they transition to elementary school to talk about these things with parents in that respect?
I don't think that there's an age that's too young to start having conversations. We recently started research at what we thought would be a younger age than most kids would have access to social media or tech, so around 7 years old. And the majority of them, over 50% of them, either already have their own device or a social media account. And so by 7 or 8 years old, kids are already on it. And so if that's happening because parents are giving them access, schools can start very early with providing them some resources to help navigate that. I myself have a 3-year-old who he has a iPad, and I will let him play around on kids' YouTube. And just kids' YouTube is a scary place. And so I'm already starting to have conversations, and we just call it "that's weird." And we'll like talk together about why that one is weird, and we'll quickly scroll past it. But they're exposed to it from such an early age that we need to talk from day one if we can.
One of those things that I've seen really effective with elementary school kids is to teach them what is social media and how do apps work. And one of the ways that I have been most impressed by is giving kids access to the App Store, not giving them access, but sitting down with them, pulling up the App Store in, let's say, Apple, and going to the privacy section of any app and helping them understand what it means. Because you get into an app and it says, this app gives you the weather. Oh, great, it's a weather app. Or this, is Candy Crush and kids want to play. Okay, let's look together at the privacy. This app will take the data from all of your other apps and sell it off to someone. It says it right there. It's pretty clear. And that is an interesting way for elementary school students to begin asking questions. Wait a minute, do you mean that they're going to look at what videos I watched on the browser, even though this is a weather app? Yes, they are. What are they going to do with that? They're going to sell it. Do I make money when they sell that data? Oh no, you most certainly do not. And just helping them to enter it with our eyes wide open of what is this? And what is the critical way to start thinking about anything you see online? And of course, some of them are perfectly innocuous and okay. And just to recognize, you are in charge of being the critical consumer here. Not your parents, not the companies. No adults have done that for you. You're in charge of that.
We have a question back here.
Hi, my name is Eva Fight. I work here at NC State with the Park Scholars, which are a wonderful group of college students, very talented. We take them on a retreat before they start college for 3 days with no phones, and they love it. But I'm also a parent of 3 kids who are 9, 6, and 4. So I'm definitely on team, there should not be phones in schools, from my professional experience and now my growing parenting experience. But what I have noticed among some parents is the idea that their child needs a phone in school so they can call them when there's a shooting. And so this safety debate, which in my view, the data is very clear that the safety risks are in very young children having smartphones all the time, from all the things that we've been talking about today, right? But there's a very real feeling behind, well, my kid's got to be able to call me when there's a lockdown or when there's whatever. So not wanting to be dismissive of those feelings that those parents have, but what is the persuasive argument that the safest and the healthiest thing for our children is, even in an era where we are having this kind of violence and risk of violence in schools, is still to not have access to that phone.
Flip phones, smartwatches, a lot of folks are doing that, creating ways to have contact phones in the classroom, an old-fashioned landline phone. There are different things that people are doing, but it's a very real concern. It's absolutely scary and difficult. They do still sell flip phones, and smartwatches are cheaper than phones. And some of those have, at least today, who knows what will change, but they have built in some GPS, some ability to have contact, and they're actually cheaper. So there are different things different schools are doing, but very real and important concern.
Good morning. So as we talk through a lot of these issues, one of the things that strikes me is we keep coming back to, when you just unpack how the algorithm works and how privacy settings go, I would place money that there are some adults in this room who don't know how those work, and that most of us don't want to take the time to read the privacy settings either. And a lot of parents that I talk to when I do this work are completely unaware of how the algorithms work and how things are targeted. And you brought something up earlier that, has there been any discussion at the state level, in any of the organizations about providing some opportunities to build digital literacy, not just with our students, but also with our parents? Because we can't do this work without their partnership, but if we aren't providing opportunities for parents and communities to learn about these tools, about all the things that we've talked about here today, then this is really going to be an uphill climb as we move forward, right? And so are there opportunities for us to work together across the state to provide opportunities to help adults build these digital literacy skills so that we can partner in making sure we're having these conversations with our students, with our kids growing up? Has that been a topic of conversation? Is that work we can partner together? What's going on that?
We, much like NC State, at UNC, we're very dedicated to the public service mission towards the state from what we know as scholars. So we are one district at a time, mostly independent schools have called out to us to do exactly that in parent forums, in school assemblies, with Board of Education. We are now starting to do it with public schools. We would love to do it in a centralized way that helped for all of North Carolina at once, just because it would be more efficient and it would be helpful. So any way that we can be helpful partnering, and I don't want to speak for Henry, but Henry has such amazing resources as well, so I want to.
Yeah, definitely. I think that partnership is essential so that we can have, these resources in the hands of as many people as possible. And not even just digital literacy about algorithm, but that, what we call critical literacy. So knowing why these algorithms do what they do, and, why do they show certain things and not show certain things. And I, like you said, I think if we can arm parents with that information, especially, when kids are like in kindergarten, like you said, we can, those conversations can happen a lot earlier.
We probably have time for one more question, and I believe, yeah, over here, and here at the back. And then we'll go ahead and wrap up, but I don't want to take liberties, but we'll hit lunch right after this. If folks have remaining questions, maybe they could grab you and talk to you individually. Okay, great. Last question in the back here.
Hi there. I have a question about if you guys have seen any research around like gamification of education technology. We've seen in districts where there's full like widespread use of Greenbox, Lexia, like these different where schools are being told and their teachers are being told to use these programs with their children in K-5. And what that might have for implications on social development, critical thinking, and are districts responsible for thinking about what that implementation looks like to our students in communication with their families? I think of it as a perspective as a parent where I'm really pushing back on letting my young one use any kind of screen, and I'm concerned about her going into kindergarten, first grade, and being forced to use these items.
There is emerging research on gamification for learning tools, and I think there's good ones and bad ones. The ones that require sort of like pop-ups and navigating through things and distractions, and not just like as if it were a book and reading. So if you're reading text and then there is something to click on to pull you into the next thing, those kinds of things are maladaptive for attention and learning. I'm not as familiar with all the gamification in the education system, and I think that there are some decent ones, but I think without science backing them up, there are some that do harms to attention and learning processes that I think is probably your concern.
Well, I want to thank our panelists, and I want to thank each and every one of you, so I'll give you a round of applause. I know that I probably speak for most of us here in the room today, that we really appreciate the ability to hear from what the science is saying, particularly the neuroscience. And so I appreciate you bringing your expertise. And as I mentioned, they seem to assent or agree that they would kind of remain during the lunch hour as we transition to the lunch programming. If you have follow-up questions, please grab them. And also, if not, I know that two of them are right down the road. And Henry, we're all connected either way. So thank you one more time, and we appreciate you coming.
And thank you, Kristen, for moderating. I appreciate that as well. We are moving into lunch. That will be until 12:45. I'm going to flag for you again on your agenda document if you're accessing it online. Look at those perspectives. If you're going back to your school or district, take one of a printout of that and share those perspectives and have conversations at the start of your principal meeting or your leadership team meeting. They cover a large range of the topics that we have already presented today. The other thing I want to flag for you then are pages 2 and 3 that have links to some of the research, to have some of the strategies that people are using, links to Common Sense Media, Wake 8. As one of those links, AT&T has an assessment, a 10-question quiz. Should you provide a cell phone for your kid at this point? So it's something for you to explore and have conversations about. I think it's going to be a really rich conversation over lunch. So we have our lunch out here in the lobby. Feel free to use this space. We've got some available conference rooms back here if you needed to spread out or you want you a couple of warnings as that comes together. Thanks so much for your thoughtfulness.
I appreciate you coming.